Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. In April 1917, the Allies launched an offensive called the Nivelle Offensive, named after the French general Robert Nivelle, who championed the idea. It was conceived as a coordinated attack of British forces at Arras and French forces at Chaumont-des-Dames, intended to break through German lines with the help of a massive artillery barrage and tanks. The offensive was to be supported by the air services of both countries, in a campaign more complex than anything previously seen. But like several other major offensives on the Western Front, this one failed. The Allied air services, and especially the British Royal Flying Corps, suffered heavy casualties. So heavy in fact that April 1917 is forever remembered as Bloody April. In this video, we will analyze the reasons behind such an outcome. But first, let us discuss the kind of campaign expected by the RFC and the French Aéronautique Militaire during the Nivelle Offensive. When we think of First World War aerial warfare, we usually imagine fighter races, their victories in aerial duels. However, fighters were not the most important aircraft type in the Great War. Their primary role was to enable operations of another kind of aircraft, which in turn existed to support the most powerful weapon of the war, artillery. Artillery caused more than 80% of casualties in the conflict, and without its power, the infantry had no hope of breaking through the enemy's defensive lines. Yet, artillery was blind and could not operate effectively without eyes in the sky. Observation balloons were used for that purpose, but the most effective means to locate targets and direct artillery fire were reconnaissance and observation airplanes. In most cases, these were two-seat, single-engine biplanes. Technological advances enabled the production of radio transmitters light enough to be carried by such aircraft. The observer in the back seat could use these to send short radio messages in Morse code to quickly report the discovery of valuable targets, or to correct artillery fire. Naturally, these airplanes became primary targets for enemy fighters and usually flew with heavy escort. Apart from direct protection, another mission that enabled artillery observation planes to fulfill their role was the deployment of large fighter patrols deep behind enemy lines. The strategy chosen by the Allies sought to engage and destroy German fighters through numerical superiority. The Germans, on the other hand, generally remained on their side of the front lines and rarely ventured beyond them. In addition to fighters, reconnaissance, and artillery observation planes, there were also bombers, though their impact on the war was minimal in early 1917. Let us now analyze the capabilities of the three major air services involved in the Nivelle Offensive. The British Royal Flying Corps operated 57 squadrons of 18 aircraft each on the Western Front. 11 squadrons belonged to the Royal Navy Air Service, but flew under the operational command of the RFC. Fighter development progressed rapidly. New models quickly became obsolete as the opposing side introduced improved aircraft. The Allies generally held numerical superiority, but qualitative superiority shifted periodically from one side to the other. Unfortunately for the Entente powers, early 1917 was a period when the advantage lay with Germany. RFC units engaged in the Nivelle Offensive operated many obsolete types, such as the Airco DH-2. This pusher biplane, designed by the famous Geoffrey de Havilland, was introduced to the frontline service in February 1916. It helped end the period of German domination known as the Fokker Scourge, but by the end of that same year, it stood little chance against the latest German fighters. It was operated by No. 32 Squadron. Another similar type, the Royal Aircraft Factory FE-2, was operated by 5 squadrons on the Arras front. Its pusher configuration eliminated the need for a synchronized machine gun, but this two-seat aircraft was largely obsolete as a fighter and was often used as a night bomber instead. For most of the war, the British depended on the French aircraft industry to supplement their own production, operating many French designs. Nieuport fighters were flown by 4 British squadrons during the Nivelle offensive. Although much more advanced than the previously mentioned types, the Nieuport still lagged behind German fighters in speed, maneuverability, and firepower. However, when flown skillfully, they could still hold their own. The Royal Flying Corps Command was aware of its technical inferiority and began introducing new models early in 1917, though few were ready in time for the offensive. One squadron was transitioning to the SPAD 7 obtained from the French. This sturdy fighter could reach 120 miles per hour, or 193 kilometers per hour in level flight, and had excellent diving characteristics, but was underarmed, carrying only one machine gun. The British built 220 of these before switching production to their own types of similar performance. Another modern type introduced just before the Nivelle offensive was the Bristol F-2 fighter, usually known simply as the Bristol Fighter. This two-seat airplane was powerful enough to engage in maneuvering combat with enemy fighters, while benefiting from the additional protection provided by its rear gunner. The best British fighter to see combat in this campaign was the Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5. More than 5,000 of these excellent aircraft were eventually produced, but only one squadron, the famous number 56, participated in the offensive, and only from late April onward. The Royal Navy Air Service operated specific models such as the Sopwith Pup, a highly maneuverable biplane. One of its squadrons on the Arras front flew the Sopwith triplane, a design so respected by the Germans that many sources credit it as a direct inspiration for the famous Fokker DR-1. British observation aircraft were perhaps even more obsolete than their fighters. Most observation squadrons still operated the BE-2, a type whose earliest variant first flew in 1912. It could only reach 75 miles per hour and had very limited maneuverability. The newer RE-8 offered superior performance, but only 2 squadrons operated this type during the Nivelle offensive. Possibly the greatest problem for the British, however, was the low training standard of their aircrews. The RFC had undergone a large expansion, resulting in minimal training. Replacement pilots were often sent to frontline units with as little as 35 hours of flying time. German and French training standards were much more rigorous. No pilot was permitted into combat without at least twice as many flying hours. The French Air Service, the Aéronautique Militaire, operated about 2,000 aircraft on the Western Front in early spring 1917. Of these, 200 were assigned to the defense of Paris, about 200 were heavy bombers used for raids against German industrial centers, 1,000 were reconnaissance and observation aircraft, and around 600 were single-seat fighters. In total, approximately 800 aircraft were allocated to support the Nivelle offensive. French squadrons or escadrilles were smaller than their British counterparts, typically consisting of 10 aircraft each. French fighter doctrine at the time was similarly offensive in nature, advocating the dispatch of large formations, 20 or more aircraft, deep into German airspace to engage and destroy enemy fighters through superior numbers. However, this strategy proved ineffective as German pilots largely ignored such large formations and instead concentrated on attacking French observation planes. French fighter aviation, much like the British, largely operated aircraft inferior to those of Germany, though the disparity was less severe. Most squadrons flew the Nieuport 17 and 23. These types were relatively fast and maneuverable but suffered from low firepower. France had begun introducing the superior SPAD 7, armed with one synchronized machine gun. A total of 268 were delivered in February, with more arriving before and during the offensive. With French training standards roughly equal to those of Germany, both the SPAD 7 and even the older Nieuports presented tough opposition for German pilots. The situation in French observation units was far worse. Many still operated the Farman F-40, dating from 1915, which could reach only 84 miles per hour or 135 kilometers per hour. Reconnaissance squadrons mostly used the twin-engine Caudron G4, originally designed as a bomber, but by 1917 obsolete, with a maximum speed of 95 miles per hour and poor maneuverability. The French also flew some foreign types, such as the British Sopwith 1.5 Strutter, produced under license in France and used as an observation aircraft. Over 600 were eventually built, though few had reached operational units by spring 1917. The German Air Service was reorganized into the Luftstreitkräfte in October 1916, undergoing a thorough preparation for the battles of 1917. By April 1917, it operated 81 Artilleriefliegerabteilungen, or artillery aviation flights, with 6 airplanes each, along with 27 units specializing in observation and photographic reconnaissance. Fighter forces were organized into 37 Jagdstaffeln, fighter squadrons or Jastas, with nominal strength of 12 airplanes each. Additionally, there were 30 Schutzstaffeln or Schustas, protection squadrons of 6 aircraft each, tasked primarily with protecting observation planes. In total, German strength on the Western Front in spring 1917 amounted to about 1,600 aircraft. More than half of these were two-seat reconnaissance and observation types. The 30 Schutzstaffeln accounted for about 10% of this total, while single-seat fighters represented just under 30%. The Luftstreitkräfte was also building up its bomber force, with roughly 100 twin-engine and even some 4-engine bombers. Being consistently outnumbered by the Entente in aircraft numbers, the German Air Service adopted a defensive strategy, largely remaining behind its own lines. This approach offered numerous advantages. Downed airmen could be easily recovered. Victory claims could be confirmed. Earlier mentions of Allied inferiority primarily referred to the German Albatros series of biplane fighters. The first model, the Albatros D1, was introduced in August 1916. Though superior to any Allied aircraft of its time, it was quickly replaced by the D2 and subsequently the D3, which first appeared in December 1916. Despite some structural flaws, such as the tendency of the lower wing to crack, the D3 offered superior performance and firepower to almost all Allied types encountered during the Nivelle offensive. It became the preferred aircraft of many famous aces, including von Richthofen, Udet, and the leading Austro-Hungarian ace, Godwin Brumowski. The Albatros D3 reached a top speed of 117 miles per hour, or 188 kilometers per hour, and was armed with 2 synchronized machine guns, while most Allied fighters carried only 1. The German aircraft industry faced several challenges. Lacking mass production methods for much of the war, it could not match the output of the Allied, particularly the French industries. Furthermore, German manufacturers tended to produce many types with similar performance but in small quantities. The Roland D3 was one such example, comparable to the Albatros D3 in performance but built in far smaller numbers. German reconnaissance and observation units also enjoyed technical advantages. As noted earlier, the Nivelle offensive failed to achieve its objectives and resulted in heavy losses and even mutinies within the French army. The Entente air services were effective when weather conditions allowed flying, but they paid a terrible price, especially the Royal Flying Corps. According to authors Franks, Guest and Bailey, the British lost as many as 245 aircraft to enemy action, including ground fire. The heaviest losses were suffered by the obsolete BE-2, of which 75 were shot down. Next came the equally outdated FE-2 with 58 destroyed. Single-seat fighters also suffered heavily, with Nieuport recording 43 losses. In terms of personnel, the British lost 319 men, 211 killed, missing or who died of wounds, and 108 taken prisoner. French losses were significantly lower. The same authors report 55 aircraft lost, 30 of them Spot 7 and Nieuport fighters. In total, 63 French airmen were killed, missing, or died of wounds, 11 were captured and 55 were wounded. German aircraft losses were relatively light by comparison, at least 75 aircraft, including 24 reconnaissance and observation planes, 11 Schuster aircraft, and the remainder single-seat fighters. German fighter pilots claimed 298 enemy aircraft, including 34 balloons. The most successful unit was Jasta 11 with 89 claims. The top-scoring German pilot was Kurt Wolf with 23 victories, closely followed by Jasta 11 commander Manfred von Richthofen, who claimed 22. On the Allied side, British pilots claimed 126 aircraft destroyed, while the French claimed 70. Verified German losses amounted to 76 aircraft in total. The most important factors determining the outcome of Bloody April were the obsolescence of British aircraft and the inadequate training of RFC aircrews. However, the lessons were learned, and by the summer of 1917, the Royal Flying Corps had evolved into a far more capable fighting force. Let us know if you would like to see more videos focusing on strategy and campaign overviews instead of the usual emphasis on tactical battles. Also, leave a comment if you would like to watch a series covering Bloody April in detail, featuring individual battles, or simply more World War I content in general. Thank you and keep watching Showtime 112.